Are we on? All right, we're on. All right, well, thanks everybody for showing up again for the 12th Helbing Jazz Initiative here at Williamson Music First. A couple of brief announcements, or hopefully quick. You are performing at it's the North Lake.
The North Lake Jazz Festival tonight, which will be held at MacArthur High School in Irving. And we will go on at 6 o'clock.
Right.
We're headlining the concert.
Yep. So a nice, again, free concert, right?
Yes, free.
The second thing is we're working on some small jazz ensembles for the summertime. So if you have a group of 6 to 8 kids, and this is where a lot of kids can do their first improv, second improv, and really kind of refine it. But in a small group setting, it'll be here, or if there's other places around a high school wants to help sponsor it, a middle school, we'll do that too, right? But contact us, contact Stockton, or my name is Ray Gore. Contact me here at Williamson Music First, or Stockton Helbing, or really any of the guys. And it's so you'll get a kind of a close chance to work with not with everybody, with some of his team and maybe some other professionals, right? So just contact us about that. Other than that, I want to turn it over to Stockton, let him introduce his group, and get on with the show.
Thank you, Ray. Well, good morning, everybody. Just want to say good morning to you guys here who are with us today live in store. We have people who will be streaming this online live right now, as well as watching this as archival footage, hopefully for years to come. I just want to thank all of you for being here and checking this out today. And we are going to be talking about one of the most significant figures in jazz history today, the wonderful Mr. John Coltrane. Mr. Coltrane is going to be the subject of a wonderful documentary that is coming out very soon that's going to be narrated by the great Denzel Washington and is going to feature some amazing interviews. So it's really cool to see Mr. Coltrane being relevant and being celebrated in our culture today. He is most definitely one of the most important people in jazz history for the way he furthered the music. And one of the things I admire the most about Mr. Coltrane, other than his amazing musical accomplishments, is his ability to gently express his feelings and to express his feelings with positivity through music. And there's so many wonderful things that he wrote doing such. In particular, he has a wonderful composition entitled Alabama that I would just encourage you to do some research about why he wrote it and what its significance was. And we are going to be talking about Mr. Coltrane today and talking about the blues. And the blues are the most fundamental form that jazz musicians learn to improvise over. It's one of our oldest musical forms, and usually we think of the blues as having more of a major-y type sound, or what we're really hearing are dominant seventh chords. And what we're going to discuss today are minor blues progressions, and that's what our topic and song of the day will be. But to start the day, we're going to play one of Mr. Coltrane's normal blues. It is entitled Mr. Day. And it comes from his album entitled Coltrane Plays the Blues, which is a wonderful album. And as I always say and believe so firmly, the greatest thing we can each do to become better at jazz music is listen to great masters play jazz music. And the term master should most definitely be applied to John Coltrane. And he was such a visionary, particularly with some of his explorations and pushing the harmonic barriers that were pre-established in jazz music. But at the core of everything Mr. Coltrane did is he played the blues. And that's what's so wonderful about his album, Coltrane Plays the Blues. And the first song we're going to open with today is entitled Mr. Day. And before we play it, I just wanted to read a quote of Mr. Coltrane's that I really cherish and love. And I think it's some wonderful words to think about as we play this beautiful piece of music that he wrote. Mr. Coltrane said, "I want to be a force for real good. In other words, I know that there are bad forces, forces that bring suffering to others and misery to the world, but I want to be the opposite force. I want to be the force which is truly for good." And I hope you'll enjoy hearing the joyousness with which Mr. Coltrane wrote this piece of music. So this is the classic John Coltrane composition, Mr. Day. Sorry. Thank you so much. Isn't that a great tune? You know, the title of it is Mr. Day, and I don't really know what Mr. Coltrane was writing about, but it kind of crossed my mind as I was listening to it recently that Mr. Coltrane was a very religious man, and it's Lamentations 3:23 talks about how his mercies are new every morning. And to me, it just has this sound of Mr. Coltrane celebrating a new day and his opportunity to make as much beautiful music as possible. So I like to think of it in those terms. We heard from, on trombone, Mr. Tony Baker. I know a lot of you guys have met these gentlemen before, but let me briefly introduce them for people who are streaming or watching online. Mr. Baker is the professor of trombone at the University of North Texas. He is also a member of the Dallas Opera. He is one of the most incredible musicians I've ever met because he is equally excellent at classical music, jazz music, and everything in between. And we're always so glad to have him here because he's a wonderful musician and even better human being. So how about a hand again for Mr. Tony Baker? On trumpet, he is the Assistant Director of Jazz Studies at the University of Texas, Arlington. He has his undergraduate's degree from that same university and his master's degree from the University of North Texas, where he was a member of the 1 O'Clock Lab Band and also a teaching assistant teaching jazz improvisation. That is Ken Edwards on the trumpet. On tenor saxophone, a graduate of the University of North Texas with both his undergraduate's degree and master's degree in jazz studies. He was a member of the 1 O'Clock Lab Band. He moved to New York City and made his living as a professional musician there for several years before coming back to the Dallas area, where he has been the jazz band director at Carroll High School in Southlake, Texas. That's David Lown on the tenor saxophone. On piano from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Did I get that right? No, not Halifax, Antigonish, which is close to Halifax. He attended St. Francis Xavier University for his undergraduate's degree and then came down south to go to the University of North Texas for his master's degree, where he was a member of the 1 O'Clock Lab Band as well as, I think you taught improv. You taught the Zebras. You were a teaching assistant. Zebras. And then he was an adjunct professor of jazz piano there. He served as visiting professor at the University of, what is it in Stephenville? Tarleton State University. Sorry, I couldn't remember it this morning. And he was also country music legend Ray Price's last touring pianist. That's Josh Hanlon on the piano. And on bass, one of my closest friends for many, many years. We've been playing together for like over 20 years now, which is crazy. And we played, I don't know, 20 gigs this week, I think, together. I try to never play without him. He's a graduate of North Texas. He's originally from Ithaca, New York, but he grew up in Singapore, which is a fascinating story you should ask him about. He's been the professor of bass at Richland College for many years. He's also a great composer and arranger and writes a lot of music for radio and television. You've probably heard his music and not even realized it, but he made money off of you, so thank you. James Driscoll on the bass. He's also a notorious food snob, so if you think you like your food, don't tell him. He'll find a reason to hate it. Are you a food hater?
Only fuzzies.
Yeah, man, there goes our Fuzzies endorsement. Shoot, man, I just signed that contract. All right, so today's topic is the minor blues. And so before we get to our song of the day, we're going to play one of Mr. Coltrane's other minor blues so that you can hear the contrast of how a minor blues sounds as compared to the major blues or dominant blues we just played. This is from the same album as Mr. Day. It's actually the song that comes right after Mr. Day on the album John Coltrane Plays the Blues. This is entitled Mr. Syms, S-Y-M-S, and I do not know the story behind this either, although I would love to know the story behind it. I don't know who Mr. Syms was, but based on how the song sounds, you can probably make a deduction as far as if Mr. Coltrane liked Mr. Syms or not. I'm questioning whether he liked him or not. So, this is Mr. Syms. Isn't that a beautiful song? What a beautiful piece of music. You know, it reminds me of another really famous jazz quote by great jazz drummer Art Blakey. And his famous quote is that jazz washes away the dust of every day. And man, I just love hearing that music. I love hearing these guys. How about a hand again? David Lown, tenor saxophone. Josh Hanlon on the piano. Ken Edwards on the trumpet. And Tony Baker, trombone. So now let's talk about how everyone here can learn to play the blues just like these guys did. You'll sound just like them here in like 5 minutes, I think, right? Just kidding. You can eventually, though. So we're going to start by looking at our worksheet. It's this beautiful document. We see this great picture of John Coltrane on the cover of his album Giant Steps, and then one of my most favorite John Coltrane pictures, the famous picture by Francis Wolff from his Blue Train recording session. I just love the pensiveness of Train. Actually, recently, I had never seen this particular photo of John Coltrane in color before. It was always a black and white photo, and I recently saw the original photo. You know that one?
Yeah.
I saw the color version of this before Francis Wolff did the black and white treatment, and it was just so crazy to see that having, that's, when I think of John Coltrane, that's usually the picture in my mind. So we're talking about the minor blues today, and you'll see at the top of the worksheet it addresses a couple basic outlines about what the minor blues are. I've already talked about the major and minor tonalities, which is bullet point number 1, but bullet point number 2, just to remind everyone, this is one of the most common jazz forms that you will encounter. Jazz is a language that crosses over boundaries, it crosses over language barriers, it crosses over cultural barriers. And I firsthand have had experiences where I've been traveling throughout the world and played jazz music with people with which I do not share a language from a speaking standpoint, but we're able to have musical conversations playing jazz music together. And so one of the most common formats that you can have these international musical rendezvous with is the 12-bar blues form, particularly the minor blues. And the minor blues allows improvisers to use both blues-based ideas. Matter of fact, I thought Tony had some really magnificent examples of that in his solo on Mr. Sims. It was a great solo. I really enjoyed it. And also interesting sounds of minor chords and their tonalities, which is another favorite aspect for me of the way Coltrane plays Mr. Sims. So we're going to study one of John Coltrane's most popular compositions. It's from his most notable album, which is entitled Giant Steps. Giant Steps was a complete and utter game changer for jazz musicians when it came out. And it was recorded in 1962, and everybody on it is a jazz giant, no pun intended. But of particular note is the bassist, Mr. Paul Chambers. Paul Chambers, PC were his initials. And the song we're studying today is entitled Mr. PC, for Paul Chambers. Paul Chambers, in my humble opinion, is the greatest jazz bass player in the history of jazz music. And I'm not going to argue with anybody about it because I know I'm right. He's on more notable jazz recordings than any other jazz bassist. I think it's fairly irrefutable. And he was always present with the most important innovations in jazz. He was the bassist on Miles Davis's album Kind of Blue, which is still the most popular jazz recording every year. I would say simply because he's on that album, he's the most important jazz bass player because he's been heard the most. And then he was present on this great session by John Coltrane. And people like John Coltrane respected Mr. Chambers so much, they wrote a song for him to feature him. And that original recording appears on Giant Steps. And if you'd like to learn a little more details about Mr. Coltrane himself, I put those at the bottom. I highly recommend doing it. Understanding the musical past unlocks our musical future. The more we learn about the great musicians and the music they created historically, the better we can innovate in the present day. So I would recommend checking him out and learning more about him, particularly John Coltrane's classic quartet, which I list at the bottom, which consisted of McCoy Tyner on piano, another great bass player, Jimmy Garrison, as well as probably my most favoritist of all favoritist jazz drummers, Elvin Jones. I love his playing so much. So that's a very historically significant group to become familiar with. Now, you have also today what we call a jazz lead sheet. It's a one-page document that contains melodies, chord changes, and then at the bottom we see a solo section with slashes. And it's entitled Mr. PC. So this is John Coltrane's tune. And what you'll see is I've numbered the measures for you. They are 3 4-measure phrases for a 12-bar blues. And you'll also notice that if you look at the solo section, I've put measure numbers as well that number 1 through 12. They correspond directly with the head, as we say, jazz musicians say, or the melody above. It's just that when we see slashes, that is telling the musician to improvise. That's a scary word to most people. Improvisation is the key, unique characteristic of jazz music. No other music, no other style of music has as much freedom and improvisation in it as jazz music does. As James cited to me recently in a conversation, jazz is high information music. It's not that it's better music than other musics, it just has a lot of information in it. And because of that, it's a deep music. It wears thick. I've listened to the same jazz records for literally 25 years, and I'm still learning from them every single day. And we're going to start scratching the surface of the fascinating greatness of jazz music today. So we'll have a melody here, and what we're going to do right now as a group is we're going to demonstrate this melody for you. So those of you who have your instruments, feel free to get that up because we're going to have you play it with us here in a moment. And we're just going to go through it 2 times so that you can start becoming acquainted with it and hearing it. Because when we improvise, as Mr. Lown is going to elaborate on here in a moment, when we improvise, we do not have permission to play whatever we choose to play whenever we choose to play it. We have a great deal of freedom, but it is freedom with a great deal of musical responsibilities. When we are improvising, we ought to always be referencing the topic, just like a good conversationalist. If Mr. Baker and I are sitting here having a discussion about baseball, and all of a sudden I start talking about NASCAR, first of all, he's going to walk off. Second of all, I don't like NASCAR, so I would never say that to you. But I would be a poor conversationalist. Have you ever had a conversation like that? Have you ever had a conversation with someone who jumps from subject to subject and you have difficulty following what the main point of their speaking is? Or have you ever spoken to someone that never gives you a chance to speak? They dominate conversation. Have you ever noticed that? That is the challenge of improvising. We want to be good conversationalists. Or, as I always say, great jazz musicians are great servants of the music. You have to have a servant's heart to be a good jazz musician because you're always trying to help everybody else sound good. That's the wonderful challenge of it. It's a constant team effort. We're going to play this melody for you once. You may have noticed that at certain points of the chart, for instance, measures 3 and 4, there are some smaller notes below the larger notes. Those are some harmony notes that I wrote in, so those of you who are playing in groups on your own, you can have ready-to-go arrangements. And it doesn't matter your instrumentation, you could just choose who will play the higher or lower notes. So to demonstrate that, when we play the melody the first time, all 3 of these gentlemen are going to play the large notes, the melody notes. And then the second time when we repeat the head or the melody, we're going to let Mr. Edwards on the trumpet play the melody notes only, while Mr. Baker and Mr. Lown continue to play the primary notes. Everybody with me on that? Now, Mr. Coltrane plays this quite quickly on his original recording, and certainly that's our goal, but we want to find success so that we're not frustrated and rather can enjoy the journey of learning. So we're going to try it a little slower than Mr. Coltrane's original version. We're going to try it right here. I'm probably in the wrong key. Okay, so these are 2 and 4 I'm snapping on. You'll probably notice a lot of times when you hear jazz musicians count music off, they count by snapping on 2 and 4 as opposed to counting beats 1 and 3. And that's because in jazz music, we don't stress beats 1 and 3 strongly. We don't play da-da-da-da-da-da-ba-doo-da. That's a very European style of rhythmic interpretation. And jazz music gets all of its rhythmic richness from the rhythms of Africa that were brought to our country during the atrocities of the slave trade. And this rhythm that was brought from Africa was based on triple pulsed rhythms. And it downplayed beats 1 and 3. And that's why you'll hear jazz musicians count off a 1, 2, see how I'm snapping on beats 2 and 4? Just a little thing if you've ever noticed that. Like for us as professional jazz musicians, if we're ever playing with someone who counts us off like this, 1, 2, 1, 2, we're trying so hard, our eyes are trying not to roll in the back of our heads. Not because we think we're better than them, it's because we know they do not understand the music that we love. So that's just a really subtle difference that you can keep in mind when you're studying this music. So we're going to demonstrate the head for you right now. Ready, gentlemen? A 1, 2, 2, 3. All right, so that was 2 times through. Now, one important thing before Mr. Lowndes starts talking about the improvisational aspect of it, I just would like to remind you one thing, is that if you do not know the melody extremely well, you're actually not ready to improvise over the song yet. This is my horribly short, quick history of jazz music. But when jazz music started, they didn't necessarily improvise. They got together and played a melody. And so when they would play the melody, it took us, how long did it take us to play that melody twice? 30 seconds? How are you going to play a 4-hour gig? That'd be miserable, right? So what they would start doing is taking turns passing the melody around, which we called taking a ride on the melody. And so often, in my opinion, young jazz improvisers skip this vital step. And as a matter of fact, our next HJI session next month, and I don't know the date off the top of my head, but the first Saturday in June, will be all about that topic. We're going all the way back to the roots of New Orleans, and we're going to be talking about interpreting a melody. But just because Louis Armstrong helped define what that is, that doesn't mean it is not relevant to us in our day and age. It is equally relevant. I'll give you an example. We're going to play the head once together, and I'm going to let Dave, Ken, Tony, and then Josh each take a ride on the melody one time. And then I'm going to ask you to tell me what you hear. Fair enough? Shall we, gentlemen? I'm sorry, Tony, I didn't mean to disassembling over there.
Head once then, solos?
Yeah, just head once, and one chorus each. A 1, 2, a head to the... Could you follow along with the tune the whole time? So tell me, what did you notice? Any observations? Lay it on me. Don't be shy. Coleman, what did you hear?
They used a lot of the rhythm of the melody.
Ooh, yes. So even though notes might have been changed, they often reference the melody rhythm constantly. Good one. Anybody hear anything else of interest? Let me ask this question. Did they sound different?
Yes.
So we immediately recognize a difference in their playing. Yet all of them, we know, were working off the same assignment, if you will, because I said what I'd like them to do. So you see the enormous amount of self-expression still available to them. all of us spend a lot of time as adjudicators at high school jazz festivals and college jazz festivals all over the country. And so many times I will hear a really great ensemble, a really great big band. Articulations are good, dynamics are good, style is good. And I'm like, wow, things are going really well. And then I'll see the first student come down to improvise, and I'm really excited. And it's just, there is a whole bag of nothing going on. A whole bag of nothing. And again, I'm not disappointed because I think I'm better than them. Quite the contrary. I'm disappointed because I know they're better than that. And it's because no one has shown them these simple steps to enjoying improvisation in jazz music. Playing in a big band is fun, but just doing that's no different than being in marching band or concert band, unless we really start looking at our ability of self-expression, which is improvisation. And it is as present in large ensemble jazz as it is in small group jazz. It's just usually a little more strategic in large ensembles. So to summarize, don't neglect the melody. Otherwise, it's just generic jazz that you're playing. I ought to be able to walk in. If I walked in that door in the middle of us playing Mr. PC, and I didn't know that that's the song they were playing, during anybody's solo, I should be able to sit there and go, this has got to be Mr. PC. Because I'm going to hear clues, or I'm going to discover musical artifacts that point me towards the truth of the tune they're playing. Does that make sense? Now, that's what I would deem a very early step. But to help guide you towards the next level, Mr. Lown has a document prepared for you about improvisation and your approach to it. Mr. Lown?
Thanks. So that melodic improvisation is really, really, really important. That's maybe the first step if you're learning to improvise for the first time, is taking a melody and improvising over it, changing it into your own thing. Next, we need to look at what the harmony is, and this is what makes jazz a little bit more difficult than other types of music, because we have this harmony that we have to use to improvise over. So if you look at Mr. PC, it's in the key of concert C minor. And before I play anything, does anybody know, any of my students that are in here, could you tell me what the tonic of C minor is? The root or the tonic, do you know what that word means? I'll give you a hint, it's the 1 of the key of C. All right, get ready for this, okay? I'm about to blow your mind. The 1, the tonic, the root of the key of C is C. Congratulations, it's C.
You mean like Cinco de Mayo?
C? Like, yes? C, right? I didn't know if that was
C, it is C.
Okay. You see what? Oh, man.
Okay, I'll give you another chance to redeem yourself. What
pun
about
is
the
just
third
beginning.
of the key of C minor?
Yeah,
Anybody?
Revenge of the-
That's a note in the chord, but it's not the third. Yeah? It's E flat, because it's minor. And then what's the 5th of the key of C minor? That's right. Okay, so now we have a chord that Josh can play. C, E flat, and G. That's what that sounds like. Now there are 4 different chords. Good job, Josh, thanks. There are 4 different chords in this song, but that's the key that we're in, is C minor. That's home base, is C minor. So if I were to play an arpeggio in C minor, okay? Now there's a scale that goes with this too. And what we see John Coltrane use primarily is this funky scale called C melodic minor. So that's with a raised 6th and 7th. Okay, so we have a chord and we have a scale that goes with it. It's like if you go to like Target and you buy, like the GI Joe. They still play with GI Joe?
Oh, yeah. My son does.
You get the GI Joe and the vehicle that he goes in. It's like that. So there's the scale and the chord work together that way. So Josh, could you play just that triad again? Maybe with a couple more hands. Was that the arpeggio or the scale? That was the arpeggio. And this is the scale. All right, so all of that is to prepare you for looking at what John Coltrane played. And a lot of new students to improvisation can't imagine, like, okay, I get it. Okay, we have keys, we have a chord, we have a C minor. Somebody told me an E flat, and then I have to do a scale, and there's I don't know what's going on anymore. What do people actually play? Well, it's usually a combination of three things. Scale, I just played you, arpeggio, and this thing called encircling, which is just playing the notes around a chord note. So like the third of C minor is E flat. If I play D and then F and then E flat, that's like encircling, okay? So look at this John Coltrane solo. I chose this fifth chorus because it is purely made of eighth notes and there aren't any fast rips, like really fast runs in it. So I'm going to play it slowly for you so that you can hear exactly when scale and arpeggio and encircling is happening, and not at all because I then don't have to play it up to speed. That's no way that's the reason why, okay? So here's the Coltrane solo slowed down a little bit. You know, why don't you all play with me? Sure. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay?
That's good.
You catch all that? So he's seamlessly floating into using the scale, into using the arpeggio, and into doing the encircling. Not one time does he ever play random genius notes. Not once. If you look at it, it's either blue or red or green for the most part. It's either scales, arpeggios, or encircling. But what we notice most often is that students who are new to jazz think, oh, that's John Coltrane. It's these random, man, he's just a genius. He's coming up with these random notes. I'll never be like that. We won't be like that. We're not going to be like Coltrane ever. But we can understand better how he's playing. So my challenge to you is go listen to this recording on the Giant Steps album and see if you can listen to the other choruses of this solo and notice by ear when he's playing a scale or when he's playing arpeggio. And then start to think about that as you develop as an improviser. Think about it in that way. It gets way deeper than that and more complicated, but it's a good place to start, okay? Thank you, guys.
I love thinking of jazz improvisation as being defined as instantaneous composition. And to me, I hear nothing but genius composition when we hear John Coltrane's chorus. And that's his fifth chorus. He's just sitting there playing chorus after chorus after chorus of things that sound, when we slow it down and analyze it and play it, it sounds like he worked it out, doesn't it? It just shows the mind of these master jazz musicians. I mean, they are Beethoven and Bach's of our modern era, and they're doing it instantaneously. A lot of people speak about Bach being an improviser. Bach was notorious for sitting there at his clavichord and just like, you know, playing the old version of Mr. PC, I guess. I don't know, sitting there. So I've heard it before, and I still love hearing it, and I'm completely in awe of how excellent those guys were in completely on the spot creating this stuff. So it's not just the soloist who is improvising in a jazz ensemble. Any member of a rhythm section in a jazz group is improvising 100% of the time. Because in jazz music, improvisation does not only apply to creating a new melody on the spot, such as Mr. Lown has been speaking about, and we've been talking about when we're interpreting the melody. What rhythm sections are doing are making constant decisions on what to play to help support the soloist. We are in almost always a support role, except when we're improvising ourselves. But our support role is improvisatory as well. And we need to feed our creative mind the same way. We listen to and emulate jazz masters on recordings. And what we're going to do right now to help demystify this is we're going to quickly go through, Josh, James, and I talk about what our specific instrument does. And this is of high importance to everyone, not just people who play our rhythm section instrument, but to each and every person who has a desire to improvise, you need to understand what's going on around you, how it can positively affect you and help you reach your musical goals. So there is a separate rhythm section handout for each one of these, and that's why even if you don't, for instance, play piano, I think everyone should always take an interest in what the pianist is explaining, because the piano so clearly helps define harmony. Same thing with bass. So right now, Josh, would you speak a little bit about this tune and your approach to it on piano, please, sir?
Sure. Really, everybody's job, but the pianist is to really be about what's going on. It's like, have you ever seen one of those movies and you just like you turn it on and maybe you just flip it on the TV and you didn't go to the theater and pick that movie. You just turn it on. What? What's flip, right? It's that movie that doesn't make sense to you. And then you go see your movie and you know exactly what it's about when you go to see it. You're like so excited to see this character interact with this character, right? That's how I felt when Stockton asked for that, when we had that little game where everybody had to play about the melody. The whole rhythm section, the whole band instantly said, oh, well, we know what this is going to be about. So we could all interact because we were all listening for little elements of the melody. Right? And the same thing is true of those scales, those arpeggios, even just the notes in the scale. For example, just play a note from the melodic minor scale. Just
one note?
Yeah, just any note. Another one. He picks all the good ones. 13 and then 11. But right? So when I comp, my job is to listen to what's going on around me. I don't have to be like 13, 9, 3, 5. Although it helps. If your ear is good enough to hone in on that stuff, it really helps you to be able to have, but at the same time, if you can play about, even if I don't catch those numbers as they're going by, I know he's definitely playing extensions of the chord or the higher parts of the chord. I can listen to that, and I can play something that supports that, right? First of all, I'm going to play a lot of the thirds and sevenths of the chord. Probably not a lot of tonic, which in C is, there we go, right? Although in this style of music, I might play it with the fifth down here, because that's what McCoy Tyner, one of my favorite pianists who played in, well, not on this record, but with the Coltrane a lot, did. Because it's stylistically appropriate. But in general, you don't want to be banging away at the root. Right? So you want to think about what the top note of your voicing is and how it's interacting. Because, each one of us, piano, bass, drums, even though we're not necessarily playing the melody, we are playing melodically, hopefully. Right, and that melody should be about what's going on. So the top note of my voicing, I'm often thinking about how I can interact with the space around me. Just like the timbre of what Stockton is playing, or the note choices that James are playing, or the lines themselves, which are inherently some of the most melodic things ever going on in jazz, are. So that you can look at the nuts and bolts of this voicing sheet, which contain notes with different melodies but I wanted to get that sense of how we do something about the music.
Yeah. James?
Sure. Well, I guess it's pretty clear that, baseline construction was not lost on John Coltrane, because, this melody, if you look at it, it kind of is the bass line. If someone said, play me a bass line on C minor, I'd probably play... or something like it, So, and for some reason, I'd never thought of, it's just the bass line, because it's because it's 8 notes. I don't know, but that's exactly how you would construct a bass line, right? When Stockton's talking about counting a tune off, and you're snapping on 2 and 4, the bass is actually doing kind of the opposite, because there's a lot of stuff going on in a bar of music, in a bar of jazz, that has to be kind of covered, right? So if we're talking about sort of a musical house, the bass is the foundation, right? Without the root playing at the right thing at the right time, it's hard to give context to all the stuff that they were just talking about, right? Musically, and all the arpeggios and stuff. So I like that you're emphasizing the root of the chord, because that's our world over here, right? So that most of the time in jazz occurs on what part of the bar? Yeah, the root. Sorry, the first part, the first beat, right? Beat 1. We need that so that all the chords make sense. So if I don't play that note, there's no, I mean, all the chords are, like, play a C something. Right? I can change the chord. I'm playing all, you know, like in the key and stuff, but until I play that, it doesn't sound like a blues would sound or whatever. Okay? So that's real important, and I dig that it's the melody's just very, very much kind of a bass line. So to get a little more specific quickly, the root on the downbeat, we often think of 2 and 4 as being strong parts of the bar, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's with bass, it's kind of the opposite. It's where the kick drum plays in rock music, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So those notes are pretty important to land on. In jazz, you're walking, right? You're kind of playing sort of little versions of what's going on above it, right? You're playing lines, you're playing arpeggios, you're playing scales, and yeah, you're even encircling and doing things like that. But it's a lot of times the root on the downbeat and a strong chord tone on the 3rd beat, okay? So root, 9, 3rd. 3rd's what sort of defines a chord a lot of the time. Very clearly C minor, right? And that's the melody of the piece. And so when you're playing bass lines, I tend to just, and actually I transcribed it here, a lot of times he's actually playing the melody just over and over again in the bass line. And the turnaround, he kind of does this thing all the time too. So it's almost like a composed bass line as well. But anyway, I hope you had a good time listening to some blues today, because blues is like the basis for all of it. And there's so much you can do with it. You know, it doesn't have to be just a Mixolydian roundup. It can be all of this great stuff. You know, it can be all this. So anyway, that's a little bit about the bass there. So.
You know, last but not least with the drums, I'll be a little bit brief. I wrote a lot of information on the worksheet for you drummers. I would encourage you to check it out. This is the wonderful jazz drummer Art Taylor on this original recording. And Art, mammoth jazz drumming giant, really love his playing. He was most admired, particularly by Miles Davis, for the feel that he had. And it just made everyone feel comfortable. A lot of what I do at the drums is what I think of as mind splitting. And I actually think that all jazz musicians do this all the time. I read this pretty far out there book years ago. I kind of like reading dumb fantasy fiction about dragons and stuff sometimes. I don't have time to do it anymore, but years ago I did. Like, I started reading The Hobbit when I was a kid. Well, I read this book years ago about a wizard. And this lady's daughter goes missing, and so she travels a long way to meet the grand wizard to seek his help. And so she finally gets an audience with him, and she's getting ready to be escorted in, and the guard says, here's the deal. You're going to walk in, you're going to see the wizard sitting there, but there's going to be people all across the room speaking to him at the same time. He can listen to everything at the same time, so just walk forward, tell him what's going on, and wait and see what happens. And the lady's like, what? So she walks in, and here's the wizard sitting there, and there's all these people before him giving reports about the war, giving economic reports. Everyone's talking. And the wizard is just sitting there and randomly speaking to a person while everyone keeps talking. And the lady's like, this is never going to work. So she walks forward and then very bashfully starts saying, sir, my daughter went missing, and this starts telling what happened. And she's shocked because all of a sudden he turns and looks right at her and said, what was the date with which she went missing? He was able to listen to everything simultaneously, even answer a question while taking in more information. And I remember reading it thinking, man, that's pretty out there. But then I recently had this epiphany that that's exactly what I'm doing all the time as a musician. I am taking in a lot of different information constantly. I'm making decisions about that information. And the drums are, I believe, the center of helping direct that information flow for everyone. I am fulfilling a dual role with the bass player of fundamental time in establishing the rhythmic framework with which we're all working. I am working on comping or accompanying the soloists with the pianist and or guitarist, both rhythmically, and then listening to what they're doing harmonically and shading the intensity of my copying as is appropriate, since I am non-harmonic, but I can create intensity with other means. And then I am helping conduct the ensemble by letting everyone know this is indeed where we're at. We are at the beginning of the 12-bar blues. I'm always their tour guide, so to speak, or I'm shepherding them. I'm constantly keeping the flock together and safe. All of those things. And I'm doing all these at the same time. This has been jury week at college, where all of my college students have to play their finals, and they have to do a performance, and they all hate it, and they're all nervous. And so the week before, all my students who have been negligent and they're practicing all semester come to me in a panic. Oh, I'm just so nervous. And I was like, do you know why you're nervous? And they're like, no. It's like, you're nervous because you're not prepared. That's the only reason. If you don't feel confident in being equipped for success, you will be nervous. And if you're nervous during a performance, you're thinking about the wrong things. There are far too many things for our mind to dwell upon in order to ensure musical success. I do not have time to think about anything other than the music I'm playing and each one of these gentlemen while we're doing it. And I'm also thinking about things such as, I'm thinking about the original recording of Mr. PC. I'm thinking about Art Taylor, who I've transcribed. I even gave you a sample of his transcription. I'm thinking about Paul Chambers, the way he played bass. I'm thinking about 5, 6 other versions of Mr. PC I've heard. I'm thinking of other minor blues I've heard. I'm thinking of John Coltrane. I'm thinking probably, if I sat down and wrote it out, of, I bet, easily 50 things are on the forefront of my mind. And I'm not even smart. It's because our mind is an amazing thing. And when we start developing these type of concepts, it will grow in strength the same way any muscle will if we exercise it regularly and if we exercise it differently, so it becomes strong in a well-rounded manner. And that's really what I'm thinking about the whole time. Does that make sense? So you drummers, definitely you want to read this carefully, and most importantly, you want to listen to Mr. Taylor play. And if you want some extra homework, he has a great book entitled Notes and Tones by Art Taylor, where he went around in the late 60s, early 70s and interviewed all of his friends, who just so happened to be Miles Davis and Max Roach, Elvin Jones, Philly Joe Jones, Sonny Rollins, I think, Dexter Gordon. It's really interesting read. Highly recommend it. So, any questions about that? You know, we didn't get to hear from Mr. Edwards or Mr. Baker. You guys have anything you'd like to add before we do some playing? These guys are just, aren't these guys marvelous teachers? These guys are equally marvelous teachers. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
You guys covered it.
Oh, great. Well, good. So we'd like, as we always do, we want to do a little playing with those of you who are here. So if you'd like to sit in with us, we're going to play through Mr. PTC together. So Coleman, you want to come play drums? Want to come play drums with me? I don't want to play drums. I'm tired. So if you want to play, come sit in with us. What we're going to do right now is we're going to give everyone a chance to act upon these things because, go ahead and have a seat, buddy. Because the way you get better at something is by doing it. And if you are nervous or have a fear of trying something, the one thing that is guaranteed is that you'll never get better unless you try. So you have to try, and quite frankly, you have to fail a little bit. We learn from failure. We do not learn from success. Success tells us, hey, you got to figure it out. So once you succeed, you just keep repeating. But to build things towards success, we have to fail, and we have to learn from it. As I always say, we only truly fail when we do not allow failure to teach us something. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to play Mr. PC together. We'll play the head twice, everybody, and we'll let Mr. Baker start us off. What we're going to do is everyone's going to play 2 choruses. The second chorus, those of us who are not improvising, we're going to quote the first 2 bars of the melody every line as a soft background to help everyone realize where we're at in the song constantly. Does that make sense? Yeah? Let's try the head. Here we go at the top. 1, 2, 1, 2, here we go. How are you? Good to see you. So I think we just have the 2 of you, so we'll let Coleman play for a few minutes. You can play a while, and then we'll switch you up. Trumpets play harmony. Play the harmony notes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mr. Baker. Tony Baker, trombone. You sound so great. I'm so freaking tired. I'm just hanging in there for doing that. You need a nap, brother. Background. You don't want to try? I won't make you play. You can go play the melody with them. You sure? That's okay, maybe next time. He's been here before, so don't judge by that. Yeah, man. Very good, very good. Great, thank you so much. So those of you, if it's your first time with us, please don't be intimidated. A lot of these folks have joined us before. So you're always welcome to sit in with us, but there's always zero pressure for you to sit in too. Well, so to wrap up our presentation portion, I have an arrangement that I've done of Mr. PC. And one of the reasons I like to do this is because after we've talked so in depth about the tune, I like everyone to get a chance to hear some of the possibilities. We always listen to and cherish the classic recordings of jazz music, but one of the most interesting facets, I believe, of jazz music is it is vibrant, growing, and innovative today, just like it was in the 60s when John Coltrane, 1962, when he recorded Giant Steps. So I did an arrangement of Mr. PC, but you're going to notice it's quite a bit different. I changed some roles. You're going to hear some solo action. So it's a great reminder that even in a small group context, we can have a lot of ensemble-like playing, just like we do in larger ensembles. And so we'll see if you like what I've done to it. So this is my destruction of Mr. PC. I mean, my arrangement, my deconstruction, with my apologies to Mr. Coltrane. Where'd my sticks go? Coleman, where'd you put my sticks? I put them in my pocket. All right. You guys ready? Thank you so much. Thank you. We're over time right now, so if you have somewhere to be, we will not be offended at all, but we do have one more quick one for you. Can we play one more fast one for you? So, it's a brand new one I wrote this week. If you have to go, we won't be offended at all. I wrote the song for my children, with whom I mess with every day when I'm getting them dressed. And when I'm getting them dressed, before I put their shirt on them, I do this whole bit where I like bunch the shirt up and look through it and pretend that I'm the shirt monster. And they think it's hilarious. And I like sing this dumb little song. And at the end of it, I go, rah, and I scare them. And they yell, shirt monster, right? So I wrote a song for them called Shirt Monster. So it's audience participation. You guys ready? So there's going to become a time, and you'll know it. You're going to know when the shirt monster has arrived. And when that happens, I just need you to yell as loud as you can in your best Hollywood scared voice, shirt monster. Let's practice, okay? Ready? I'm going to count to 3. I'm serious. Let me have it. 1, 2, 3. Shirt monster! You know, that seemed too happy. You seem to have like the monster is not a Sesame Street monster. Have you guys seen Stranger Things? We're talking monster like you're not going to sleep at night. So we'll try to set the tone for you a little bit better. But we need you. Can I count on you? So they call that in Hollywood, you're a Foley artist. That's where you like help make sound effects. So you're going to be Foley artists today. So can you handle it? This has nothing to do with John Coltrane. Just so you know. Although I make my kids listen to John Coltrane like all the time. I'm brainwashing them early. You guys Hey, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We'll be here first Saturday of the next month talking about Louis Armstrong, talking about New Orleans, and talking about using the melody to improvise. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Thank you so much. Thanks for hanging. Hope you're not too scared.